Many people are under the impression that children have ideal posture and that they lose that good posture as they age. Intuitively, this makes a bit of sense. If it's the conditions of modern life that are destroying our posture, then we would expect babies to come out with perfectly fine posture, but for that to be degraded over time. This is also part of why so many believe that non-civilized people should have ideal posture. If they don't face modern pressures, then they should have perfect use. But personally, I'm not sure either claim can hold up to scrutiny. It's quite obvious that babies do not have the same posture as children or adults. Babies can't stand or walk. Their heads are very big relative to their bodies, so there's no reason to emulate anything in a baby. But one often cited argument for the idea that children have good posture is that you can observe that they easily go into a squat, whereas many adults, especially in America and other Western countries, would have sincere difficulty doing the same. But there's another explanation for why children are more capable of making various gestures than adults. Children do not have as strong of habits as adults do. If you're 20 or 30 years old, you have likely developed extremely strong habits of how you use your body, and even more so if you're 60. Many people's bad habits are so strong that those habits are essentially etched into the structure of their body. A person that hunches all the time will be seen to be hunched. If a person favors leaning to one side, you might observe that they always have their pelvis cocked to that side. When we repeat certain movements over and over again, the muscles and fascia change to compensate for that. To be clear, those changes can be undone. Just because we've lifted one shoulder for years or even decades doesn't mean we always have to. If we make different movements consistently, the tissues of the body will get used to that new, more balanced configuration. But most adults don't really care about their posture, and it shows in their body. They're stuck in their bad habits. A child, on the other hand, hasn't been repeating movements for decades. Children are much more malleable than adults are, that's obvious. And so we would absolutely expect that children would be capable of making a broader range of movements. There hasn't been time for their habits to get ingrained into them, and so they have more options. What we admire and love about seeing children play and move is that they do have a certain freedom. They're not locked into a lifelong habit. But that is not the same thing as having ideal posture. If you simply observe children, you'll see that they often go into obviously bad posture. Children are able to move into all sorts of different postures. They aren't stuck in one bad habitual posture. That is what they have that adults do not. There really is no reason to think that a child should have ideal posture. Children are not generally taught how to use themselves. They learn by imitation and trial and error. Now, if a child was only ever walking outside while barefoot, I think they probably would develop pretty good habits of walking. But that's not how most children learn to walk. Many of them are put in cumbersome shoes from a very early age. Then they are forced to sit in chairs, sometimes for hours on end, with no instruction of how to sit. If the child is taken to visit their grandparents, they might have to sit in a car for 3 hours. And all the while, they're learning how to walk and move by observing how the adults around them walk and move. So why would we imagine that a child is going to develop and learn to move in the ideal way? Most children will imitate the bad habits of their parents. If you add on that many children are put in front of a TV or phone for portions of the day, it's obvious that the child is having many negative pressures applied to them. I would say that children are developing bad habits of movement earlier in life than ever in human history due to the influence of all these modern stimulations. Just look at what happens to a child's posture when they sit in front of a screen for an extended period. The younger you are, the more resilient and malleable you are. When a student who is 18 comes to me, they have a much easier time getting movements going than when the student is 68. The 18-year-old is still going to feel a stretch and is still going to have to work, but they basically always have an easier go at it than a person with decades of bad habits. Though even elderly people can change their posture, it just takes a bit more to get going. But it's just obvious that younger people typically have more freedom because they have not been stuck in a rut for nearly as long. That freedom is wonderful, but it's not the same thing as having ideal posture. So then you might say, if it's modern overstimulation that causes postural problems, why not look to non-civilized people? Sometimes people use the term primitive or tribal because we basically want to describe a person who is not living a modern lifestyle. I think non-civilized captures the point, a person who is living a pre-agricultural way of life. Really, the entire assumption that a non-civilized person will have ideal posture is based on the debatable premise that animals have ideal posture. It's very easy for us to compare different dogs or horses and see that they can suffer from similar postural problems as man. However, you could also say that dogs and horses have those problems because of their interactions with man. Well, non-civilized people are also interacting with mankind. They are mankind. This is the crux of the assumption. Non-civilized people still have conscious minds that are essentially or completely equivalent to the minds of civilized people. So even if we did grant that animals have ideal posture, the main difference between animals and humans is the use of the conscious mind. Non-civilized people are capable of making relatively complex tools and are capable of complex speech, things that no animal can do, because of their conscious mind. So why would we assume that they have this perfect, majestic use of self and posture that we might imagine animals to have, when there's this real difference between the minds of animals and humans? When we look at non-civilized people, do we see that they all display a similar ideal posture? Or do we see variation? Now you might say that variation is evidence that posture doesn't really matter, that there is no ideal. But this variation seems to suggest that while some groups or members of certain groups of non-civilized people display quite impressive physiques and postures, others don't. Which would mean that non-civilized people are not inherently displaying ideal posture. If any significant number of non-civilized people do not have ideal posture, then we no longer have reason to assume any of them are ideal. Just because someone is not experiencing acute postural problems does not necessarily mean they have ideal posture. Consider this. The whole premise as to why non-civilized people would have ideal posture while we do not is that they don't experience the negative pressures of civilized life that we do. So really, we would expect that even if their posture was suboptimal, since they're not experiencing much negative pressure on their posture, it would never get that bad. When you have very little negative pressure on you, and you also eat a natural diet and live a naturally active lifestyle, it seems quite possible that you could completely avoid back and joint pain, even if your posture was a bit off. But we are not in that situation. If you're watching a video, there's a good chance you're part of modern civilization, where you have constant negative pressures on you. If your posture is a bit off in that situation, how do you think you're going to hold up when you're sitting 5 hours in a car or scrolling on your phone for an hour straight? Do you really think that if you took one of these non-civilized people and put them into our world, that they would be fine? You don't think they would start to suffer from the same problems we do trying to sit in a chair for hours on end? That's the big lesson we've learned from history. We were all non-civilized people at some point in the past. Then people became more civilized, and they were overtaken by the negative pressures produced in the civilized world. F.M. Alexander conceived of it like this. He believed that mankind, like animals, had for a long time guided our actions essentially subconsciously. We were attuned to the environment around us, and so it didn't matter if we applied our rational mind to our movements or not. If you've been walking through the woods, climbing trees, and hunting and fishing your entire life, and that's what your ancestors did too, you can keep up with that lifestyle using only your subconscious guidance. You won't have ideal posture, but you won't have any real postural problems. Your instincts are good enough. However, civilization is dependent on us using our conscious minds. We don't generally hunt anymore. We live in a manufactured box. We are not using our instincts when we enter information into a spreadsheet on a computer. Our ancestors didn't scroll on a phone for an hour straight. Our instincts and our subconscious guidance are not good enough to get us through this consciously constructed world that surrounds us. Instead, we have demonstrably folded under the pressure produced by our modern world. We have crumpled or strained ourselves trying to stay upright. The way to overcome that is not to go backwards. It's not to return to our old instincts, because those instincts are attuned to a life that we don't live anymore. I would concede that if you go out and live in the wild, you probably couldn't do it and would still have postural problems. But your children or grandchildren might be good enough out there in the wild without ever needing to think about their posture. And look, I support the idea of going out to live in the wild more than most. If that's the way you want to go, I think that's great. Wrap a loincloth around yourself and head out. But for those majority of you who will probably not spend a single day in your life not sitting in a chair or looking at a screen, you need to deal with that reality. It's not good enough to hope your ancestral instincts will get you through. We've seen how that goes. However, we are not hopeless. Just as our incredible conscious minds allowed us to build the world of abundance and convenience around us, where we can fly through the sky in an aeroplane, our conscious mind can allow us to use ourselves in a rational way that can withstand this modern abuse. It actually is possible to sit in a chair without it destroying you, if you know how, if you understand how your body works and you gain the skill to use it properly. I know there will be some that just won't accept this. Many have a dogmatic belief that what is natural is right, and by definition, whatever untouched people do must be what's right for everyone. And since people in ideal conditions don't necessarily need to reason about how they use themselves, no one should. But in my opinion, that position is asking us to reject a part of our humanity. All of us are conscious, reasoning beings. Why would we not want to apply our conscious mind and our reason to how we move and how we use ourselves? Our conscious mind is man's great gift. As F.M. Alexander called it, our supreme inheritance. We could pout and say it's not fair that we have to deal with the negative effects brought on by the inventions and creations of our conscious mind. Or we can get to work understanding ourselves. We can reason about how we move and act. And we can press forward towards a logically derived ideal. And in doing so, we can gain a resilience that is deeper than what we had when we were non-civilized. We can hold up to the pressures of our modern world that was built with our conscious mind by applying our conscious mind in this new world that our instincts are not prepared for. We are losing something. We are losing our old instincts, so carefully honed, because we have lost the environment that honed them. There are only two possible solutions. A retreat back into the wilderness, which again, if that's what you want, I support you all the way. Or we can go forward and use this incredible tool that man has of conscious thought to move beyond the instinctual. If we don't have ideal conditions, we do need to be closer to ideal posture. We need an accurate idea of what ideal posture is. And if we can get there, we should be able to move more like a child or a non-civilized person, in the sense that we will not be at the mercy of our habits or at the mercy of the negative influence of our modern world. So if you're planning to stay in civilization and you don't want to suffer the negative effects, you need to be able to apply your conscious mind to how you use yourself. And if you're a young person who doesn't want to get stuck in bad habits the way you see the adults around you stuck in bad habits, you need to apply your conscious mind to how you use yourself. To do that, we have to understand what is ideal. The ideal I use doesn't come from cherry-picking which non-civilized person looks best to me. So next week, we'll dig into what supports the model that I say is ideal, and look at how we got there.